It's 6 o'clock, so I think we'll begin. We moved the special cleansing ceremony inside tonight because there were some logistical issues. So I have the honour of introducing Millennial Elder Rory Bell, who's going to give us cleansing ritual and welcome to the country. In acknowledgement that we are all one law. Starting point for our discussion in the next.
Thank you. I'd like to start my welcome ceremony, cleansing ceremonies with a tradition that we've carried out for thousands of years, and that's when we meet other members of our group out on country, we greet one another. I will say a word to you, and you have to quite enthusiastically say that word back to me. Okay? Yuma. Yuma. A bit more enthusiastic. Come on, we'll try again. Yuma. Yuma. Beautiful. That word in Ngunnawal language is hello. Okay, so we've just greeted one another, we've said hello to each other. Now we'll get into the other nitty-gritty side of things. So what I'm going to do for you is a cleansing ceremony that not many Aboriginal groups around Australia do, but it's what we call our eucalyptus cleansing ceremony. Eucalyptus is quite important to us as Aboriginal people Australia-wide. You'll see us all using eucalyptus in ceremony. You'll find that the women dance with the eucalyptus, they're waving it around. You'll find that the men will use it tied to themselves because they're using clap sticks and to make noise, keep the rhythm for the dance. So to us, because the land contains all our past generations. So a tree then, for us, makes that spiritual connection with the land and our past generations. So that's why eucalyptus trees are so important to us. All right. Now trees are, not a lot of people know much about trees. They're quite important in the fact that without trees, we wouldn't be breathing. Okay? So it really gets to my heart when I see trees being removed for the sake of development. Anyway, what I'm going to do is, because of that spiritual connection with the land that eucalyptus trees have, what I'm going to do is release the spirit. Now I'll walk around and wave this eucalyptus because that's the spirit being released, and it's going to cleanse everybody's aura. And everybody has their own personal auras. So we cleanse it through the release of the spirit from the eucalyptus. Okay, so it's quite a simple and easy ceremony. What we're going to do then is, like I said, release the spirit, and basically all I do is crush the leaf. And you can smell the release of that spiritual part of the tree. Okay? And what I will do is walk around waving this, and I'll wave it around myself. So what I'm doing is removing any bad spirit that might be attached to me. So it's cleansing my aura. I'm going to cleanse the delicate auras. And you can actually smell the aroma of the eucalyptus, which is the spirit itself being released. Okay. I'll just quickly. The reason I'm doing everybody is because I can't leave anyone out. If there's any bad spirit that might be around, you will have latched onto your aura. I need to get the spirit around you, remove that bad spirit. Okay. Hopefully now that if there's any bad spirit here, it has been chased off the country by the spirit of the eucalyptus. Righty. Now our way of doing things on country is that any visitors that come to our country, we are obliged under our traditional customary law to make them welcome. So what we're mostly people get welcomed onto country, but my clan group, not all people, we have 7 different clans, but my clan group, we actually take it a step further and we offer up a protection for you while you're on country as well. Okay, so what we're going to do is look after you in a physical sense, then we're going to look after you in a spiritual sense. So the physical part's going to be taken care of by our spirit of the land. That means that as you're walking around on country, the land itself will look out for you, make sure that nothing physical happens to you in a bad way. You know, there's going to be slips and falls, and that's something that is quite acceptable, but we're going to make sure that nothing really bad happens to you in a physical sense. The other part of that is the spiritual protection. So that, I'm going to describe that. Everybody here, like I said, you've got your own personal auras. Now, under our belief systems, we know that there's bad spirit out on country. And that's something you can't see or touch. But that bad spirit has a tendency to latch onto your aura. And it does something to you on the downside. You know, makes you sick or sad or something like that. It's not a nice spirit. Like I said, it's a bad spirit. So we got to call upon our past generations. Now, our past generations are people that have been here before us, been put here in a physical sense to look after the place and care for country. And when their time was up, they then went back to the land. So we call them our ancestral spirits. So that's something that's occurred now for thousands of years. So what we do is we call upon them to remove that bad spirit. What they'll do is make sure that there's no bad spirit present in this room. But to make sure that they know I'm here welcoming you guys on the country, I'll make a bit of noise and call for those spirits to join me. Right? So my noise, I'm going to use clap sticks. It'll sound like a okay. Yeah, look, my being an Honour man, and I do a lot of work on my country, and I have a really strong bond with my country. I can actually feel that those spirits have now joined us. Hopefully you can feel the presence as well. As I said then, the spirit of the land will now look after you as you're walking around on Honour country. Make sure that nothing really bad happens to you in a physical sense. At this very moment, our ancestral spirits are going around to everybody looking at your auras, making sure there's no bad spirit that might be latched onto you. If there's something you can't see or touch, our ancestral spirits will take care of it. They'll grab hold of them. Throw them off country if there is any here. Get rid of it, something we don't want here. We don't want it to affect you as a person. We certainly don't want it to affect the land that you're on. The spirits then ask that you do two things while you're on country. First one, really important one, respect this place that you're in. Look after it, care for it, as we have done for thousands of years. Second thing they want you to do is also to respect and be kind and courteous to other people that you meet while you're on country. So if you do these two things for us, the spirits will then harmonise with your stay on Honour country. So may the spirits be with you today, tomorrow, and for always. I'll just finish up the welcome with some words in language. Darawanunna, Darawananoy, Yangu Nanawari, Danamayan, Narayanawari, Yomolundi. This land is not all land. All come together today. Welcome. John Yamaba, thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to respond to my brothers here. I'm from West Papua, New Guinea. You know, 250 kilometers from north of Australia. We just cut off because of ocean. But in the spirit, we say, the spirit is saying, when you call your ancestor, my ancestor also want to respond, and we are connected in the spirit. So West Papua is 350 tribes, and I'm one of the tribe called the Lani tribe represented, but means all the tribe 350. On behalf of 350 tribes, I want to respond to my language. Wa, 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 kakameme, yonda. I wonder that kina mera di spirit power konse korano ana rono vai da ba ineri ko Indonesia no kiba yonda wa bai me yonda an yumino di kendro ba mi pagi spirit no nim the ancestor ni Guinea ancestor Melanesia ancestor Micronesia Polynesia unite yonda aboriginal spirit no ni ikazo dai bai ko di symbolic dari Melanesia and Kengim Pagi. For us, land is our mother. Forest is our supermarket. But colonial power destroyed our livelihood. Why I'm fight? Preserve language, culture, who we are. This is represent whole Melanesia. I want to give you we are connected now, today. From now on, we work together to fight for our people, survival of our people. Secondly, this is a symbol of unity. Unity on behalf of the people of West Papua. They are fighting for the survival of Indonesian colonization. So I want to give you this, remember the people of West Papua, and one day our ancestors will unite free people from the colonial repression. So I want to give you this to remember people of West Papua struggle. Wow, 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 wow.
Indigenous Diplomacy in Action. I'd like to introduce our Dean, the Dean of the College of Asia Pacific, Helen.
I always have to do what Luca tells me in terms of where to stand. So, thank you, Siobhan. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for coming out this evening. Let me start by acknowledging and celebrating Ngunnawal Elder Wadidal for that beautiful cleansing ceremony and for your gracious welcome to the country. And also, thank you, Ben, so much for your very gracious response. We've been given an opportunity this evening to learn more about the human rights situation in West Papua from three eminent leaders. So it's my great honour to formally welcome to the Australian National University the delegation from the International Parliamentarians for West Papua, the Chair, the Honourable Alex Sobel MP from the Labour Party in the UK, who is seriously jet-lagged, having not long arrived here, so he's doing a sterling job. And we thank him. A member from the IPWP, the Honourable Ralph Regan-Vanu, the opposition leader of Vanuatu, and Mr. Benny Wender, who is the president of the United Liberation Movement for West Papua, and also a member of the IPWP. So as we mark the 75th anniversary of the ANU, I can think of no more important topic to discuss than the future of the Pacific. Since our establishment, way back in 1946, the Pacific has been and continues to be an important focus for the university. And West Papua remains an issue of importance to the Pacific leadership, as is indicated here by the attendance of such notable dignitaries. It's also, of course, of importance to our researchers here at the ANU, Dr. Siobhan MacDonald from the Crawford School, and Sala George, Dr. George Carter, the co-director of the Pacific Institute, who are hosting these eminent leaders during their time here in Canberra. And although they've been here for a short time, they've already had a very busy and productive time. Our researchers at this university work with the region, they advocate on behalf of the region, and they have spent their careers working with the people in the region. It is the people-to-people relations between our college and the Pacific that have enabled us to earn your trust and have such distinguished leaders choose the ANU as a place to discuss West Papua. I look forward to learning more about European and Pacific efforts to raise the profile of human rights in West Papua. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. And I turn the proceedings over now to back to Siobhan and her very capable hands. Thank you.
So we thought that we would run the panel in a slightly different way tonight, because I know that there will be different degrees of expertise and awareness about the issues of West Papua in the room and online. What we thought we'd do is start with more personal accounts of the movement. Sometimes people feel intimidated about being associated with this movement in particular. And so the first set of questions that I want to ask our panellists are about their personal accounts of how they became engaged in the space of West Papua. So Alex, I'd like to start with you, please, and just ask, how did you first become aware of these issues and what made you want to become involved?
I mean, I was completely unaware of the issues until I ran for the first time for Parliament in 2005. I ran in completely unwinnable seat for the Labour Party in the south of England. I got an email from Benny. Benny had not long been in the UK at that point, and he was emailing parliamentary candidates for support to establish the group, both the group in the UK and the International Parliamentarians group. And I responded to him after I'd read his email explaining the issues of the Indonesian invasion, the subjugation of the people, the human rights issues in West Papua. They were then, which are not dissimilar to what they are now. And I was appalled that it was not widely known, alongside the struggles in Tibet, Western Sahara, Kurdistan, Palestine, etc. And I responded to him saying that I would like to support the cause of West Papua, but unfortunately I wouldn't become parliamentarian at that election. Then he said, no, it doesn't matter. Join anyway. So I became a member of the Parliamentarians of West Papua before I was a parliamentarian, quite a long time before I was parliamentarian. And I've supported ever since. And when I got elected, Benny, I wrote back to me and said, I'm a parliamentarian now. And he goes, that's great, because we need a chair. So I became the chair.
And when we've spoken about it over the last few days, you have said that the movement in the UK has grown in part in response to Benny and in response to those personal kind of people-to-people connections that Benny has been working to foster. Absolutely.
I mean, Benny's based in Oxford in the UK, and he's been in the UK for nearly 20 years now. And when people meet Benny, people hear Benny's personal story, but also the issues on the ground, which Benny, as you'll find out shortly, articulates very cogently. Then people respond and join the group. And we had a big intake of new MPs in 2017. Very large number of the Labour MPs joined West Papua APG at that point. Again, 2019, we had a smaller intake, but again, we had new MPs join. We've had, MPs join from all the different parties because of the different issues. Right, the whole political spectrum, probably actually the most right-wing party in Parliament probably isn't the Conservative Party in the UK Parliament, probably it's the DWP, but we have a member of the DWP because of the issues around religious freedom, which they care a lot about in West Papua, all the way through, to the Greens, the Nationalists. It's a very wide group, and that's as Benny articulates, understands people's politics, where they're coming from, what their issues are, and articulates that in the context of West Papua, whether that's about the environment, whether it's about religious freedom, whether it's about human rights, whether it's about the geopolitics of the Pacific, so he's an excellent leader for the movement.
I just want to ask you one other follow-up question, which is something that you will have encountered a number of times. Anyone who's attached to the West Papua story has encountered a number of times, which is that the shock of hearing the story for the first time, and then the follow-up question of why have I never heard this before? Why have I never heard about this situation?
Well, I think if I can compare it just for a moment to, and I'll give a bit of personal context. So one of the reasons why I was so supportive is my own family's journey. We're diasporic Jews. My family returned, if you like, to Israel after a 2,000-year gap. My father in 1964, he, like all Israelis, went to the army, fought in the 67 war. He was demobilized after the war. He immediately joined or helped create one of the first groups in the Jewish community to support two-state solution after the occupation of West Bank and Gaza. And, that's the context. We understand that context. But if you look at why there's a big movement in Palestine, there's a lot of reporting, it's on television, that although there are lots of human rights issues there is still greater or lesser extent freedom of the press. If you look in Gaza, CNN has an office, although they're bombed. BBC has an office. I think even ABC has an office. If you go to West Papua, which press organisation has an office? Nobody. We had an issue in 2017 where there's a measles outbreak because the Indonesian authorities don't inoculate children against measles. In West Papua, there's a big outbreak of measles. The BBC sent a correspondent from Jakarta. She got off the boat. She was questioned by the military. She gave the wrong answers. She was put back on the boat and went back to Jakarta. So the BBC have not reported on the ground there for many years. They're not allowed to. If we had freedom of press, even to the extent they do in Palestine, I think this would be right up the international agenda.
Yeah, more people would know.
Yeah.
Thank you. So Ralph, I mean, there's such a long history of the West Papua movement in Vanuatu. Is it something that you feel like you have always known about, or was there a moment in time where you decided it was a cause that you wanted to actively pursue?
Vanuatu is very supportive of West Papuan freedom. Vast majority of the population. And it comes from the time when we were a colony. We were one of the last Pacific Islands states to become independent, although we know there's so many that remain. The Pacific is the area of the world with the most colonies still, mostly the US colonies, France. And so Vanuatu became independent in 1980. I was in primary school at that stage, and my parents were part of that independence struggle. Vanuatu was probably one of the only Pacific Island countries that in the independence struggle there was bloodshed. Most of them were just about orderly handover of power, whereas in this case we had to actually fight for it. And in that period there was a lot of solidarity between the movements fighting for independence in New Caledonia, Tahiti, West Papua, New Hebrides at the time, Vanuatu. So when we became independent, after that struggle of a few years, the first Prime Minister, who's the leader of the independence struggle, Father Walter Lini, made the declaration that we have become independent, but we will not forget you, who we've been working alongside at this time. And that's why the foreign policy of the new state of Vanuatu was very stridently anti-colonial, in support of liberation movements. And so I was aware of that. This, at the time, one of the first things after independence was the meeting of the Nuclear-Free Independent Pacific Movement in Port Vila, where all the representatives came. I think Rix was there.
Yeah.
And as I came here to uni at ANU, did Pacific Studies, became more aware of the background of these issues, went back home, and naturally just, if you have an interest in politics and identity and self-determination, you cannot not know of and be aware of Kanaki, New Caledonia, West Papua. And I think it was the late 1990s, we had a politician come on the scene, a senior politician, who didn't follow the general perspective of being in support of West Papuan independence, and actually began to interact with Indonesians and began to use that as a leverage to get support for his political career. So at that time, I was one of a number of us who formed for the first time the Vanuatu Free West Papua Association, simply just to maintain that awareness in the population and make sure that the government never did this in the future, which is something we're seeing happening in a lot of Pacific Island states. Those relations with Indonesia, you start to abandon those sort of ideals, and that association is still going very strong now. And when I became Foreign Minister of Vanuatu in 2017, I was able to continue that struggle at that diplomatic level.
Yeah. Thank you. So Benny, I would like you to share your story with people, but only in a way that is not painful. Maybe just the aspects that you would like to share, because I know parts of it are very traumatic.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for having me, and Ralph and Alex. I think firstly I would like to thank you to Dean of this university to welcome us. And secondly, the elders represent this great country to welcoming us. And thirdly, thank you for facilitating this meeting. Yeah, just personally, I want to thank you on behalf of the United Liberation Movement people of West Papua. I'm sure they are watching over this modern technology. My story is simple because every West Papua have their own story to tell. It's painful sometimes, but my own story is, I think I grow up with the issue, and I born with the issue, and I grew up the issue. So Papua Merdeka or Free West Papua in blood, because when my mom gave birth, it's already, I'm screaming Papua Merdeka, I think. But where I see myself, I become a witness why I want to fight for the freedom for West Papua. Because I've been through, I become a witness. I see myself. When I was my childhood, 1977 in my village. This 1977 event happened across the highlands. And I'm sure my people in back home are watching. They know this tragic history, what happened. The bloodshed cross highlands. Simply my sentiment will grow up when Indonesia start bombing my village, and then we go into hiding beyond the mountain, and Indonesian military walked toward to us, and my mom she's screaming, and the stranger people come toward us, and my two auntie, one of 14 years, one 18 years. So she used the language trying to, then the military just stopped and beat my mom. She, with a gun battle, she fell down, and my two auntie was raped in front of my eye. At that point, I screamed for my mom or screamed for my auntie. I think that made me painful. I never forget, and I never seen them again, and I never seen my mom again. I think that is sentiment. This is not about fighting. It's not about the Benny become well known. No, this is about myself. At that point, when I grew up, like 7 years in the bush. 7 years in the bush, from 1977, 1984, 83. Then we loyal to Indonesia, and the trauma made me...
Something inside you changed.
And maybe that people thought maybe 30 years ago, but this happened. Like what happening in like last 5 years. Indonesia bombing in Danjaya and Duga, Maibarat, Oksibin. Just remind me of what happened in 1977. Every West Papua can tell this story. But this is happening myself. That's why I went to school. I studied in Jaipur. I studied political science, so that's why that knowledge I use. I don't want any West Papuan Melanesian treated like animals. And I don't want the girl to be raped. The mother being beaten, and I don't want to that happen next generation. It is sometimes painful. This is my own story, but every Papuans will tell their own story. Maybe I'll stop there. Yes.
Yeah, it's a hard story to share.
Yeah.
So there's this long history of human rights issues in West Papua, and I think part of what would be really good to share with the audience are some of the contemporary human rights abuses that are going on now. And we know that even though there's a lot of media problems, that these have been documented through UN rapporteur reports, through UN reports. They were raised at the 2019 Pacific Island Forum in a range of different ways. So, Benny, perhaps you could speak a bit more to the contemporary situation and some of the large-scale human rights issues that are happening now.
Since Indonesia illegally occupied 96 treaty, then bloodshed at the beginning until today, almost 500,000 Indonesian massacre. So 500,000 means 500,000 men and women been killed. While I'm speaking, killing is continuing. It's 6,000 and 100,000 West Papuan are displaced.
Yeah, 60 to 100,000.
Send 25,000 troops, additional troops in West Papua. That is the middle of the war. Now we're watching what happened in Ukraine. The world wake up because of media, but West Papua is 60 years war. And why Indonesia get away with impunity? Because Indonesia blocked out the media 50 years. It's just talking like North Korea. So this is political prisoner. Victor Jaimo still ended up 25 years maybe. And 8 students were raised in morning stuff. This is morning stuff like you cannot raise in West Papua. I was arrested 2002 just because of peacefully leaving. And unluckiest person to escape before me been poisoned, kidnapped. And if I'm still in West Papua, I will release 2025, maybe 3 years time. But because why I escaped? Because the army want to kill me in prison. If I stay, I will be killed. So in terms of political prisoner, more political prisoner in West Papua. Indonesia get away impunity. Yes, as I mentioned, Indonesia will allow Amnesty International, Red Cross, International Peace Brigade, totally. West Papua is a militarized zone. Indonesia not only massacre my people, but also destroy our environments, our forests, our mountains, our rivers. This fight is not about only political independence, but preserve our language, our culture, our identity, and our land being stolen by Indonesian government. So this is the Indonesians killing my people. Is state-sponsored terrorists killing the people of my people. That's why it's now it's worthy to react and look at the current with what's happening in West Papua. I hope these students are really clever people here. So you are the future leader, and I hope today you learn something that this is happening right here. And I know in the Pacific and in Australia and New Zealand, they look at the issue in other part of the world, but this is happening right here. This issue will never get away. This issue will be here in the regions. We're talking about peace and justice and democracy, the other part of the world, but what happening in West Papua? So, yeah.
Great, an important overview. Yeah. So if I turn to you, Alex, I wonder if there are some particular human rights issues that you've been working on, and how have you been progressing them through the European Parliament and through other parliaments as part of that international network of work?
We just talked about the fact that there's a lack of media in West Papua. That isn't the only issue. There are a lack of missions, external missions to go to West Papua and look at human rights. The last time there was a mission was the World Council of Churches in February 2019. That's very much, it's not, World Council of Churches is not a recognised multilateral institution. There's been an agreement that the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner will have a mission to West Papua. That actually there was 11 times there was a request for that mission to go. The Indonesian government has not responded to that request. There's agreement in theory to go, but in practice no mission has gone. So our number one priority for the International Parliament of Papua is for that UN Human Rights Commissioner mission to arrive in West Papua to look at the whole range of there are lots of claims about human rights in West Papua, but we don't know for sure because none of them have been officially verified, and that's why we need the United Nations to go in. I think we should all welcome that. There are lots of claims from all sides, but without independent verification, identification, and a report, then we won't know. Amnesty International wrote a report in 2018. Again, somebody that's not a part of recognised multilateral organisation, NGO. We need this report, and so what we've been doing is we've been gaining support of governments and now the support of the EU officially for this mission to happen. So in the European Parliament, there's a question to the Vice President of the Commission, Josep Borrell, who's Vice President for Foreign Affairs, a very important person in the structure of the European Union, and he said that the European Union urges the Indonesian government to create the practical steps for that mission to go. We had the same response in the UK from the Minister Fraser, Amanda Milling, as you've consistently had it from successive Minister Fraser. We get to a lot of ministers in the United Kingdom. And we've had it from the Spanish government, we've had it from the Dutch government, which is symbolically very important because it's a former colonial power. And we've established a friendship group in the Dutch Parliament actually and in the European Parliament now as well. And we're also, this is all the same question we've been talking today in Canberra and yesterday in Canberra with parliamentarians here. I'm going to Wellington at the end of the month. We've had the same conversations with New Zealand authorities. And I'm sure Ralph will talk about this, the initial call was made really through Ralph's instigation, through Pacific Island Forum in 2019, then the ACF, which is the Caribbean, African and Pacific multilateral body, repeated the call from Pacific Islands Forum. So it's, we are approaching the 100 nation mark in terms of governments that support this UN mission. And it's really important that happens. And, the more people understand, the more pressure you can put on in every country in the world, the more likely it is to go.
Thank you. So Ralph, perhaps you can speak a little bit to the 2019 resolution and the kind of broad base of support that you think might be there in the Pacific.
So in the Pacific, there's a lot of support among the populations of the states for the West Papuan struggle. And this was verified when the Pacific Island Forum did a few years ago, attempted to reach out and find out what Pacific populations thought about, what were the most important issues to them. And West Papua came out on top. It was the issue that the Pacific Island populations felt their states, their governments, should do more of. And so that reflects the general feeling throughout the Pacific in support of the struggle of West Papua, which is sometimes reflected in the government's position and usually is not. In the Pacific Island Forum Leaders Communique, which comes out every year at the Pacific Island Forum Leaders Summit, which is all the leaders of all the Pacific Island states, West Papua has always been mentioned. They talk about human rights situation in West Papua and so on. It wasn't going anywhere fast, and so in 2019 we changed tack and we made this call for the UN Human Rights Commissioner to visit, and that was based on the fact that in 2018 there had been some sort of so-called agreement from the Indonesian government that the UN Human Rights Commissioner could visit, but they haven't. And so we're sort of putting more pressure on both Indonesia and the UN mechanism to make sure that this happened, for the reasons Alex has stated. After that meeting, that resolution was passed in Tuvalu, at the Pacific Islands Forum in August of 2019, and then a few months later we went to Africa to lobby. We've been lobbying in Africa the year before because it was important to recognize that historic moment where the Indonesian invasion of West Papua was validated by the United Nations, there was a backlash from many African states who did not want to accept it. And so we went and lobbied those same countries that had made that intervention back in the late 60s. And so we got the support of many of those states. And in 2019, they supported also the Pacific Island Forum resolution. And then now we have the European Commission as well. And we are here in Canberra basically to lobby the new parliamentarians, the new makeup of parliament to, there has been, I visited here a number of times. I met with the West Papua Parliamentary Friends of West Papua group, based in Parliament, cross-party group. And so we're basically here to meet the new parliamentarians, see who the people are who are interested, and just make those contacts and encourage them and get them to know that we are part of this larger group, what's happening. And so we've been very encouraged by the meetings we've held here. There is going to be a good group formed here across different parties. And I think it's important, as we've been discussing with the members of Parliament here, that Australia does more to recognise and acknowledge that there is a big human rights crisis on its doorstep, and it needs to raise its voice more. It can't just be silent. And one of the questions which will be asked in Parliament, because the MPs have said they will raise it, is whether the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister on their first overseas visit to Indonesia raised it at all. There's the mandate. The Australian government agreed to this resolution at the Pacific Islands Forum in 2019. Are they actually going to follow through and put the pressure on? And I think we're encouraged by the fact that the increase in the number of Green Party members of Parliament and Senate and the crossbench, because the Green Party has always been very consistently strong in their support for West Papua. And so we're hoping that that will be replicated in the other parties that we have started to meet, and the MPs who also have expressed their support.
Thanks, Ralph. And some of the accounts that we've heard from those members of Parliament are very similar to Alex's, that moment of shock about learning about the history of West Papua for the first time, about learning about the scale of the human rights set of situations that are going on there, and have, the fact that they've never heard about them before. And I think that's a very familiar experience for a lot of Australians. So part of this is about just building awareness and getting the message out about some of what's going on Australia's doorstep. So I think what we might do is open up to some questions from the audience and online. We've got time for a few questions. If there's something that you want to ask the panel or a panel member in particular. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you all for coming and speaking to us. It's really inspiring to hear what's happening internationally and within our region. As an Australian, I'm just curious to know who the parliamentarians are that are involved in this cause. Can you tell us a little bit about which party members are supporting it?
Yeah, so I mean, historically, we've had a Friends of West Papua group established for a number of years. The composition of that is a co-chair composition. So part of what we're doing is reforming that large committee at the moment, because as soon as members of Parliament take up positions as ministers or assistant ministers, they can no longer hold the committee chair positions. So the previous co-chairs of that were Richard Di Natale and Jed Carney. And it has a large cross-party basis. So we have Conservative members that are members of that committee, we have a large Green distribution, and we have Labor members as well. And there are a whole range. If you look at the International Parliamentarians for West Papua composition list, you'll see some of the membership of the Friends of West Papua Australian kind of makeup. But we've also been working very hard on meeting with crossbenchers and newly elected independents to really start kind of mobilising some thinking around some of these issues as well.
I'll take a look, thank you.
I'm just interested to know the similarities and differences between East Timor's path to independence and how they were able to gain traction at that point in time, but West Papua has continued with its challenges with the Indonesian government.
Okay. So East Timor, very similar trajectory in terms of not much support in the international community from states. Vanuatu, for example, right from the beginning, being strongly supportive, but not many, and Australia definitely not. But one of the differences with East Timor and West Papua is the support groups all over the world, the civil society support groups like the East Timor Support Network that was built up all over the world. That is not something we're seeing with West Papua, and that needs to happen. But the fact that it was a struggle that was only, like at one point I remember meeting Zanana Gusmao telling me he was up in the bush listening to the radio and they heard this country, Vanuatu, who's supporting us. Out of all the countries, there's only one. He didn't even know who they were, you know. And Australia was definitely not in support. And then suddenly there comes a point where I suppose the right moment in history, where suddenly there has to be action taken. And I think that we are coming to that point with West Papua because the militarization is increasing, the resistance is increasing. It's coming to a point where it's not good. It's not good, but that's the same thing that happened in East Timor. But I think that the big difference is the support groups on the ground. And I think that's something that needs to happen. It's quite difficult. I don't know why it's different in that way, but maybe it's...
And I think part of what Ralph has been laying out tonight is this very strong level of support that Vanuatu has always shown West Papua, and it comes from that movement in Vanuatu of fighting for independence, this really, really deep recognition amongst the leadership and amongst the population around what that means in a deep and tangible way. But I want to pass to Benny just quickly because Benny's won a very prestigious prize, and partly for his message of peace. And I think it's important that we hear that given the potential for escalating conflict in West Papua.
Thank you. Yeah, I think maybe I just want to add one quick question. Yes, I think the world needs maybe what they want to see bloodshed like East Timor, Santa Cruz massacre, and they want to intervene, or I don't know. That is the biggest question. Secondly, the difference between East Timor and West Papua, because some of the brave journalists went in and then smuggled all this news out. Mm-hmm. In West Papua, barely the journalists go in. That is difficult, different. Maybe the Australian, New Zealand, or world want to see the bloodshed, but that point is too late. So now we need to move this generation that you have the power to change this narrative, because you have a technology like Twitter, anything you can do to end the bloodshed. We don't want to. West Papua is like time bomb. This is time bomb. So why the West Papua is escalation? Because of the militarized zone in Asia Pacific. That's why now Indonesia built the Papua Highway. This road they're building is not green development, but it's for the military to cutting our trees. That's why the military will deploy in Papua, build the road. The road for who? We don't need road. And for who, the big question. They split the province. For who? We don't need the people are refusing in West Papua. They call this developments, so-called developments. Indonesia, the laws, the political argument, legal argument, they know they legally occupied our country. Only the whole of West Papua is by a military force. That is a full stop. they're trying to convince the Europeans and the, big power like Australia and New Zealand that we are bringing developments. You cannot build a development on top of suffering. So my people just want peace. They want to peace their own land. We not go to Jakarta and, disturb the population. We are living our own land 50,000 years. Like Aboriginal, our brother here, they live in thousands of years. We have peace in our own land. We not come to Jakarta and invade Jakarta, but they are coming to our territory. So I don't know why the Indonesia deployed thousands of military in West Papua. You cannot win war with a bow and arrows. Little ride a gun, stolen gun, and fight the mighty military power in the regions. So for me, I want to make peace. But Indonesia led our sovereignty to give it to us peacefully. That's what my campaign to highlight this.
Just going to go here.
I'm an associate professor at the Crawford School here. I'm interested in any of the panelists, actually, if you might be able to provide your interpretation of the terrain of politics on the Indonesian side on some of these issues. I can imagine that there would be not many sympathizers within the Indonesian government on West Papua independence, but perhaps there would be pockets of support for things like UN Special Rapporteur visits and things like that. So could you describe a little bit about your interpretation of the Indonesian side in terms of the political terrain?
He's asking where is the support in Indonesia amongst the politicians, and particularly from the rapporteurs, is there any support?
I think for the ordinary Indonesians, particularly the solidarity groups across Indonesia, across archipelago, widely spread support for our struggle. But the politicians, because the Indonesian constitution nationalism is very strong, it's very difficult to any politician speak out about West Papua, maybe individual. But I know there is a human rights campaigner and Indonesia solidarity. Like one example, Veronica Koman, she's the human rights lawyer in Indonesia. She's just speaking out about injustice in West Papua. She was targeted. She's now in Australia. She is a brave woman. Indonesians, we're talking about Indonesians supporting West Papua. She is a brave woman in Indonesia, maybe in the world, and she's very strong advocate for the injustice happening in West Papua. But the politicians very difficult. Even the governor or West Papuan politicians speak out. They got text message, don't talk about this. And most MP from West Papua speaking out about West Papua's current situation. Some of them already dead in the hotel in Jakarta. It's really hard to speak about what happened. Their own people, they can see what's happening. I'm sure there is individual really sympathize, but they are scared on their own government's intelligence and intimidate harassment. That's why it's really hard. But yeah, I think Indonesia solidarity group, human rights, like the human rights group. I forget who's it there, the group in Jakarta, LBR. The LBR group in Jakarta, human rights commission. Yeah.
Human Rights Commissioner.
Yeah,
that's true. The Human Rights Commissioner has spoken out.
They're all speaking out, but Indonesia not listening, so it's really hard.
I think,
yeah, I just very briefly say what we see, in modern times in this sort of scenarios is huge amount of false flag operations, disinformation, misinformation. The Indonesian state are utilising these tools. We can just compare it actually to what's happening with Russia and Ukraine actually, and actually with Serbia and Russia in the Balkans. So these two European examples, these are exactly the same tools, or they're not being utilised as well or as professionally, shall we say, by the Indonesian state, but they are. And this has an effect on particularly on domestic politicians. And you could say maybe what's happening, there are clear equivalences. So having Russian politicians, which again, it's an elected state in the same way as there are in Indonesia. And actually maybe we should quietly look forward to the end of the current presidency, President Widodo's presidency in 2024, and look beyond that. But we need to be making pressure externally, and when we think about the utilisation of trade agreements, for instance, the EU are negotiating, they're in the final stage of negotiating a free trade agreement between the EU and Indonesia. These pressures do come to bear because the EU have committed to putting in human rights clauses into that free trade agreement. And so we need to think about not just traditional methods of how we pursue human rights self-determination, but thinking about trade, thinking about other areas that we can utilise to further human rights issues, self-determination issues for West Papua.
I just realised that one of the issues we haven't touched on at all tonight is the green state kind of approach as well. West Papua has one of the largest stands of old growth kind of forest in the world that's currently being demolished mainly for oil palm plantation. So this becomes very important in the context of climate change issues. Perhaps, Alex, you would like to speak to that?
So one of my other roles is I'm the co-rapporteur for COP26 for the Interparliamentary Union, which is the organisation of all the parliaments. And my other co-rapporteur, Alessia Rotta, is the chair of the Environment Committee of the Italian Parliament and the vice chair of the IPWP. The issues of deforestation, of mineral extraction in West Papua are of a scale that we're all seeing in the Amazon. Everybody understands what's happening in the Amazon and Amazonia. Obviously on the ground we don't have evidence, but we have, fortunately in this area, you don't need a mission on the ground. We have satellite imagery and it shows the scale of devastation of the Papuan rainforest. And it's not just an issue for climate, it's an issue of biodiversity. There are quite a number of unique species that don't occur anywhere else in the world, even Australia, because of separation millions of years ago. Australia and West Papua, so tree kangaroos, for instance. You don't have tree kangaroos in Australia, but they have in West Papua. And these are all, areas of real concern. So Benny and others in the movement, working with experts and NGOs, created the Green State vision, a vision of how an independent West Papua would be guardians of that rainforest, of that ecosystem. And we launched that at COP26 in Glasgow. With parliamentarians, with diplomats from the Pacific, with NGOs, and it's part of also, we've got COP27 this year in Egypt, we've got COP15 actually, which is the Chinese, the presidents held in Montreal, and we're going to try and push the issue of deforestation, particularly in West Papua, and we've started to engage actually with Brazilian opposition politicians as well. We hope for a regime change in Brazil as well this year, and to try and take these issues together of deforestation, the two biggest rainforests that are being destroyed on the planet, and trying to move these alongside the human rights and self-determination. I see them as three legs of the same stool: human rights, self-determination, and ecology of West Papua.
Thank you. So we have Yes, Rex. I think we have time for one more question, comment. Question.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I direct my question to Honorable Alex Kandol and Honorable Ralph and also support the various roles. It's a general question. With the international experience or lawyers' experience, and also the case of Kosovo with the Parliament, International Parliament or European Parliament in South Sudan, you think the time has come to apply Resolution R2P of 2005, right for the state to protect.
I mean, I think we have got international experience and precedents that we can utilise. The path, there are more than one pathways. The most obvious pathway is through the UN Self-Determination Route Self-Determination Committee, obviously, again, Indonesia, and decolonisation, blocking that. I mean, there is some irony here that a former, country that was under colonial control and has a place on that committee because they're a decolonised country are themselves a colonial power. I think that's the only example, more or less. Maybe Morocco is the only other one where that's happened, where you've got somebody who's decolonised, then they colonise somebody else. Think that we could potentially use the South Sudan experience. But again, we need international pressure, we need governmental support. I mean, the one gaping hole, actually, the thing we haven't talked about is almost absence of discussion. And actually, I haven't been able to get any support from politicians, elected politicians at a federal level in the United States. I don't know, Ralph can speak to that as well. We almost every country can have some level of engagement we've not had from the United States. And actually, historically, this is a problem created by the Kennedy presidency in 1962.
Yeah.
Politically, not was created by the Kennedy presidency and their actions in the UN.
So any last comments, any last reflections you want to offer to the audience before we close up tonight?
Yes, I think you support West Papua means you support our vision, because we already offer their visions. But when West Papua independence, this is the Green State vision. This is the first time in the world we because world now is facing the crisis, climate change, the sea rise. So West Papua is offer the solutions, because West Papua is a lung of the world, and I hope your generations will pick up this issue already campaigning. So now we come to the concrete solutions, which means the Green State visions. Indonesia has nothing to offer. They already destroyed. If you continue to support Indonesia, means destroy, because only this, after Amazon, is West Papua is one of the rainforests now is still in the region. So we need your generations, the audience, and people who are watching, and wherever you are watching, please support our visions. Yeah, this is the vision that everyone tonight to take this vision. Look up this the website, Green State Visions, United Liberation Movement, Green State Vision. This is the only offer, and we join and fight for the liberation of the West Papua, because one day you will be proud, because issue of West Papua getting known, and one day you will be part of that, making history. Human beings make history. So that's why you can see the British Empire collapse, Russian Empire collapse, Indonesian Empire might collapse, because they keep continuing to doing this. So that's why I invite all the young generation today watching, please join. Thank you.
So there's two potentially very important diplomatic moments right now. One is the new Labor government's announcement of Indigenous diplomacy. So that is something we're very interested in because we are all Indigenous states, all surrounding Australia, like from the east up to the north. We're all Indigenous states, including West Papua. Indigenous diplomacy offers a new opportunity for interacting with the Australian people, the Australian government. And so we're interested to see where that goes. Also, the states of Papua New Guinea, Solomons, Vanuatu formed the Melanesian Spearhead Group as a sub-regional grouping, particularly on the issue of decolonization in the late 80s, early 90s. Now Fiji is also a member. FLNKS, the Independence Movement of New Caledonia, is a member. And Vanuatu has just taken up the chair of that, the rotating chair just last month. And we are going to push now for the ULMWP, which Benny represents, or is the head of, to become a full member. And if it does become a full member, it means it has the same status as the states of Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, Solomons, FLNKS within the sub-region. And that will give it an extra clout that we need diplomatically to be able to go out to other countries. So these two things mean there is a new opportunity right now that we intend to take advantage of to push this struggle to the next level. Thank you.
I think, it's a real honour for me to be here in Australia, to be in the Pacific, talking about this issue. I'd actually never thought I'd make it this far from home, 10,000 kilometres away, talk about this. But I've said, very clearly that the governments, the Dutch government, the UK government, the European Commission now have made this very strong call that the UN High Commission, the mission should go now and go and report on human rights in West Papua. And I'd urge people in Australia that the government's 10,000 kilometres away called on this to write to their representatives to put pressure on the Australian government to make the same statements. So it's an issue 250 kilometres away, not 10,000 kilometres away. And the Australian government made very strong statements about Ukraine, which is 10,000 kilometres away, but not so much West Papua, which is just across the water. And again, when we have the international conferences under the UN auspices, COP27, COP15, which again Australia is an important party to, and I have to say, slightly political point here, under the previous Australian government, they were real blockers actually in progress on climate issues in COPs, whether nature COP or climate COP. And I was there today at the question time when the new Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said, this is a historic moment for Australia on climate. Well, it should also be a historic moment for Australia on climate diplomacy for West Papua, because they can speak out about the Amazon, and I'm sure they will. That'll be a major topic of conversation both in Sharm el-Sheikh and in Montreal. But maybe Australia should be making West Papuan rainforest a major part of climate diplomacy as well, because it's the nearest rainforest. Large rainforest, obviously the rainforest here in Australia, but largest rainforest to Australia.
Thank you. Please join with me in thanking our panel.